like, okay, yeah, you might be the world champion, but the TV champion is right at your heels. Even sometimes maybe the TV title could even mean more than the world title, depending on who's holding it and what angle they're in.
ECW TV Championship. The first thing I want to know about that, because as we were talking in the previous episode a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about your defense of that title against Anthony Durante, Pitbull number 2. And to sort of piggyback off that, I'd like to ask you about the importance of the ECW TV title, because you look at other promotions out there. I don't know if Mid-South had TV titles, WCW had TV titles. Why was it that ECW's TV title was held in such high regard, almost to the level of the World Championship?
I think because Paul, he knew that would be the stepping stone to the championship, and he wanted to elevate that title to seemingly give it that, like, basically top contender for the world title. So it would create a lot of unique dynamics. Plus, when Robbie had it, Van Dam, that was a great stepping stone because it wasn't like he was talking about like necessarily the second best title or whatever. He was talking about as the TV title, and our fans knew that was just a matter of time before it was the step over into world title territory. So when Anthony had it for that brief time, Jericho for that brief time, later Taz, of course, the step up. That was like sort of the motion to the fans that here's your next champion. And without being tied into doing that, if say like one of the bigger companies would come and cherry pick. But Paul felt necessary that rather than having like WWF having a lightweight title or an X division title and a girls title and a division title and tag team title and this title and that title and title, everybody has a title. He wanted to make it, keep that still somewhat finite, so it still maintains some specialness. That if you're a champion, that means you're one of the top guys. And I think that's the reason he did that. Again, having never spoken to him directly about it, but Paul was always hypersensitive to those little nuanceable things like that. Like, okay, yeah, you might be the world champion, but the TV champion is right at your heels. Even sometimes maybe the TV title could even mean more than the world title, depending on who's holding it and what angle they're in. I thought it was brilliant by Paul to keep that always on somebody for the most part during the runs of ECW. That any of the titles were typically on somebody that could carry them, that were worthy of being champions. Others that didn't need them, like the WWF never put belts on guys like Andre, right? Because they were more a spectacle, an attraction. Well, Sandman was an attraction for ECW. There were, when we bring the guests in or things, the bigger names, you could maybe switch it on there for a brief moment, but it gave that feel that, as if it were a real sport. If Arn Anderson steps in here and works at the TV title, or TV champion, boy, he's at the top of the card and could conceivably win that belt and take it back to WCW. So it gave a lot more dynamic, and I think it elevated each of those titles as they were running, in lockstep with each other, if not occasionally like this, but they were always right in that same neighborhood. And so if you were a fan of baby faces and didn't like the franchise's champion, you could say, well, it's so chic today in America. He's not my president. Well, he's not my champion. Taz is my champion, or Jericho's my champion. But it always kept that bubbling up to the top. And again, I think it's just a brilliant tactic by Paul to keep it special and to sort of portend out like the cards, the seance cards, that here's your next champion coming, maybe. And it gave a chance to groom them. So it was good booking part on Paul's part.
Speaking of which, right, so I'm sure as a fan like me would say, well, how do you make a title special? Well, one, you don't have that many titles, so there's a lot of wrestlers going for a few titles. Other things that I might suggest that was probably obvious is you don't switch the titles too much, and you beat strong contenders cleanly. What else, more like nuanced answers, would you say makes a title special?
Well, the way it's portended, right? It's I think in the WWF, aside from their, I remember there was a segment with, I forget what outlet they had it on, but Triple H is sitting on a bar stool, and behind him is a wall, of all these different current belts. There's like 12, 16, 20 different belts behind him. I remember thinking like, okay, so you have a belt, I have a belt, they have a belt, everybody's got a belt, we're some kind of champion. It really does water it down. Then Vince instituted all these crazy rules. You can't say title, you can't say wrestling, you can't say this, you can't say that. Okay, well, here I got this hunk of metal that's really important, and it's, it's just so counterintuitive to what we're supposed to be doing. And creating that specialness to the champion. To be honest, as somebody that's a 40-year veteran in the business, I can't even tell you right now who the champions are in either company, because it's really irrelevant to the champions, because the belts don't mean anything. It's a prop now that you might have it for a week, somebody else will have it. Again, back to Paul, keeping it on there. We had talked in the previous episode about Bob Backlund, and it wasn't I hated Bob Backlund as champion. I was by that time gravitating to become a heel fan, like a heel mark. And he was very, very dry to me, a very dry delivery and everything. Loved his wrestling, but wasn't, necessarily kind of at that age character that I would have gravitated to. And what drove me bonkers is that he held that belt for 7 years. And same thing with Muhammad Ali when he was younger. When he was champion, and I was much younger, they used to have his fights on TV. It didn't matter who Ali was fighting. I wanted him to lose, right? And it was because he was a big mouth and, the sting like a butterfly, float like a bee, and all that, the great stuff that I would later emulate, right? And really understood fully just how brilliant this guy was. The incarnation to mine would be, you can love me, you can hate me, just talk about me, right? It's because if you're talking about me, and you're going to be if you hate me, and you're going to be if you love me, that means you've got pretty much everybody in that building. There's nobody on the fence. And it's just a brilliant marketing strategy by Ali. And I think Paul grew up at the same time I did. He saw a lot of those things, saw a lot of the trends maybe before the rest of the world saw them, and sort of jumped on it. The whole extreme thing, that's extreme, this is extreme, that's, this and that's extreme. But Paul also came up at the time in the wrestling business, sorry about that, with that old school. When he's taking the pictures and stuff, he's in the buildings when there's no ring music, and all of those types of things. So I think Paul, as different as a trajectory as he took ECW to give the fans a different product, a lot of that was predicated off of things that he had learned in the old school, but applying them in a different way. Bruno was champion on and off for 12 years. Later, Backlund would have it for 7 years. Typically, when the heels would get it, be for a brief interlude to get it to somebody else. And once that started, and now it's just a sort of a champion du jour, right? It's okay, you're champion today, but tomorrow you'll have it. And the belts change hands so many times, it really becomes meaningless. And some people, like I said, Andre for WWE, WWF, I guess then, Sandman for us, Big Dick Dudley for us, 911 for us. We had a lot of attractions that the belt wouldn't have elevated, wouldn't have done, and they wouldn't have elevated the belt. So they didn't require it. Paul understood that. And if you go back and look in those 7 years, it really is strange how seldom those belts changed hands. TV title far more than the world title, but relatively stable over the entire time of the company. And I think that made it all that much more special. At the time that we took the Eastern Championship to Extreme with the belt throwdown, Paul was very careful. And I remember multiple times he would correct me on promos. We'd have to do the promo over because I would say the world title, just rolling off my mouth. And he would say, it's not a world title. It's a regional title. It's a provisional title. Anything but world, because it was lying. And he knew that would delegitimize once we tried to elevate the Extreme Championship Wrestling belt. That if we were calling that belt World Heavyweight, even though we were only wrestling in like 3 or 4 cities up in northeastern United States, that was hardly, if anything, at best regional. And even though Extreme Championship Wrestling would mimic that for some time before we started spreading out, it now granted to the fans the idea that he had been the NWA champion, which is worldwide, should have been the champion there. And so it elevated the title and the promotion at the same time. You can see strategy, brilliant strategy. And as aloof as Paul made it look in his booking, just winging it, there really was method to his madness. And I think that's a large part of what made ECW.